it is official, according to President Trump, President-elect Trump, rather, that he has chosen Linda McMahon as his next Secretary of Education here. So Trump saying, "It is my great honor to announce that Linda McMahon, former administrator of the Small Business Administration, will be the United States Secretary of Education." He says for the past 4 years as the chair of the board at the America First Policy Institute, Linda has been a fierce advocate for parents' rights, working hard at both AFPI and America First Works to achieve universal school choice in 12 states, giving children the opportunity to receive an excellent education, regardless of zip code or outcome or income. As Secretary of Education, Linda will fight tirelessly to expand choice to every state in America and empower parents to make the best education decisions for their families here. So you see there McMahon and Trump there at Mar-a-Lago. So yes, McMahon served in the first Trump administration as the Small Business Administration head. She has now been tapped to lead the education department. Now, this is somewhat interesting because some in Trump's orbit, including Trump himself, have flirted with the idea of doing away with the Department of Education outright. And so we'll have to wait and see whether or not the newly formed Department of Government Efficiency cuts at the corners of the federal bureaucracy, and will they start there at the Department of Education? That remains to be seen.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca. And please subscribe, rate to future, and on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where you found this episode. All right. We also have shirts, and you can contact Andy for that on our blog. All right. Thank you. All right, Jake, it's great to see you. Great having you back. For those that don't know, John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education, and also the contributor to New Politics, the Center for Research on Globalization, Op-Ed News, Interpret Report, The Dissident Voice, and Unlimited Hangout. All right, so why don't we get started with today's topic? Andy, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, well, first off, Jake, definitely good to have you here again. We missed you. I think it's been at least 3 or 4 months since you've been on an episode. Certainly it was before Trump got elected. And you went on record a long time ago saying Trump was going to win and that Trump was the establishment candidate. I think all these events have proven you right. And you also were early on for me, many years earlier, were one of the first people to introduce me to the kind of technocratic change that's going to happen in education. You and Alison McDowell are two of the people who are most essential in having me understand that a lot of the lockdown measures that came around COVID were really about a digital transformation of education and the rest of society. And I think really now, with Trump's victory, I think there's another moment now to look at what the Trump victory means for what's going to happen in education. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that. And so I'll just give you the floor. I know you asked I asked you about what I should read, and you mentioned the partnership. What's that thing called? Let me get the name. The Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise of 2025, the 2025 Project, the section specifically around education. So I've read some of that, and I definitely think I'm interested in talking about it. But I know you want to bring up more than just that in terms of framing what is likely to come in education with Trump's win.
As far as what I think is going to come down the pipe, Project 2025, I think lays it out pretty clearly. If I could I guess I could give like a really brief overview of what's in there. So there's 3 main proposals. Okay. One is basically to get rid of the Department of Education. That entails a whole bunch of restructuring that we'll talk about in detail. Another is the school choice agenda. And the third one, which I think is going to be largely the selling point to the most of the conservative base, and that's going to be sort of this anti-woke curriculum, right? So getting rid of all things critical theory, queer theory, etc. And that's sort of to me, that's sort of the cheese in the trap. It's like, the selling point is that getting rid of the Department of Ed and replacing it with school choice. The reason why you want that is because that's going to get rid of all this woke stuff. So that's sort of the what's on the platter. I will say that in Project 2025, they suggest getting rid of the department. They don't necessarily say for sure that they will, but I would guess that they probably actually are going to try and do it this time for several reasons. But the first that I'll just start off with, and then I'll pause, is his choice nominee for Department of Education, which is Linda McMahon, a woman with zero experience in education other than dumping money into some school choice initiatives. So that's what I surmise off the top. But I'll pause here and let y'all jump in and talk about, or take us where you want to go.
Well, I mean, I think what I wanted to just highlight. You're talking about Project 2025, Department of Education. I think who co-wrote is Lindsay M. Burke, and I was looking up her bio, and she's well connected, very pro ed choice. Why do you assume that it's going to be completely that the department's going to be not going to be there? I suppose, or not going to be a part of administration.
Okay. So the reason why I started with McMahon is I would guess that if you put somebody with such little experience in, they're just a placeholder. They're just a placeholder while you work on getting the bill passed, because the Department of Education is created by an act of legislation. Therefore, it will take an act of Congress to get rid of it. Can't do it by executive order, can't do it administratively, right? Even the secretary can't say, yeah, we're axing the department, okay? So if he intended to keep the department there and to run all federal education through the department, I would think you would pick somebody that would be a little more savvy for the job, a little more qualified. Okay, that's one indication to me that why I think they're going to go through with that proposal. The other is that in Project 2025, it states that that's what they want. That is on the table, right? So, sorry, my notes here, they're all over the place. Okay, so if they get rid of the Department of Education, they propose a bill to do so, which would basically tentatively be titled the Department of Education Reorganization Act. All right, so and what that would do is, okay, so remember now, people think like, oh, they're going to get rid of the Department of Ed. That means we're going to get rid of federal education. No, that will not get rid of federal education, because that doesn't get rid of the entitlements. It just gets rid of the bureaucracy. People forget that we had a federal we had a federal Office of Education. Okay, the Office of Education goes back to like 1860, around 1860s-ish, okay? It was created by a guy that was one of the first people to be high up in the National Education Association. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. But it was part of the Department of Interior. All right, and there's reasons for that I don't need to digress and go into, but eventually around the 50s, it moves from an office in the Department of Interior, so it still was a federal agency, but it was an office. Office basically just means it's a smaller unit within a department, typically. Okay, so they moved that office to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, HEW. It was an office, okay, and all three of those, so basically, Health and Human, when they broke it up in 1979 and they took that Office of Education and they just made it into its own department, And then the health and welfare was basically the health and the human services. All right. And so then that's where you got HHS. HHS became its own department. Okay. So that's all just bureaucracy, right? Like the actual the entitlements, like that mandate who gets how much funding for what, your Title IX, your Title IV, et cetera. Like that's all a separate act. That's under the education ESEA. I always want to say Every Student Succeeds Act. That's the current form of it. The original is ESEA, so it's Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That's in this. I want to say it's in the 60s. It's LBJ. I think it's early 60s. Okay, so if you get rid of the department, you still have the entitlements. Right. So the entitlements would then therefore have to be covered by other departments, other offices, other agencies, which they specifically stipulate in Project 2025. Right. And I got a list here. It says that when we sunset the Department of Education, this would transfer entitlement programs to other departments, including HHS, Labor, and the Department of Justice. So let's see. So the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education would go to the Department of Labor. Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services would go to HHS. Money for Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, would go to HHS. The Office of Civil Rights, this is to make sure that nobody's discriminated against, that's going to go to the Department of Justice, DOJ. Office of Post-Secondary Education, for some reasons, goes to Health and Human Services. Programs important to our national security interests, that's a quote, those are going to go to the Department of State. The Institute of Education Sciences, that's interesting because that's where the regional education laboratories that Charlotte did a lot of research on and I've sort of expanded on. That's going to go to the Department of Commerce's Census Bureau. And that's probably most of them, but I'm pretty sure I itemized certainly all the most important ones. But so that gives you a sense of that. Yes, that's not only do they have a bill in place, not only do they have somebody that signed up or nominated to run the department, basically somebody that more or less is not qualified to do so, but they're telling you where they're going to send the other departments. Right, like they thought this through, and here's one more reason why I think they're going to go through with it, because one of the big platforms here, and y'all have talked about this on a few episodes, is the Make America Healthy Again, the MAHA movement. Well, part of that's going to also be mental health and things like that. It's going to dovetail with education, and it's going to be a lot easier if you move those entitlements to the Department of Health and Human Services than if it's in the Department of Education, because then you could make a legal argument that, well, those are education records protected by FERPA. These are healthcare records protected by HIPAA. You're mixing the bowls together and you're not supposed to do that. But if you move the entitlements to those departments, you can basically, you can more easily integrate and centralize the ubiquitous data tracking that is the whole point of the digitization of the education system. It's to track and trace not just the students' cognitive behavioral metrics, in terms of their workforce abilities, but also their tendencies to become, at-risk juvenile delinquent, basically criminal, possibly become criminals, their health status, all that stuff is to go on their blockchain digital ID for their social credit. And it'll be easier to legally streamline that if the funding mechanisms and the regulatory bodies are situated within those other agencies. So that's the other reason why I think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that they know that they'll be able to do it. They certainly want to do what you're saying. But I think the other reason that Linda McMahon is the right person to move in that direction is, she did have her educational experience was she was on the board of education in Connecticut or something like that for a period.
Oh, okay. Well, I put my foot in my mouth on that one. Okay.
Yeah, but she has no educational experience. She said she wanted to be a teacher. That's her educational background. She wanted to be a teacher, but she was on the board of ed. But I think that
the state board. I'm sorry, I'm just curious. Like the state board was like a local.
I'm not sure if it was a state or local. But I just remember hearing that she was on the Board of Ed in Connecticut, but I don't know if it was at the state or local level. But that's it. She was just a politician, basically moving money around on a board, and helping make directives of some sort. But her role in government, she was previously appointed to a position in the Small Business Administration under Trump, and her role there really was to basically keep the Small Business Administration running while they dismantled it. So, she basically was oversought actually having it run well while they took about I think it was like a 5% cut in the administration. So to me, it's clear that at the very least, they're going to begin to take those pieces apart, and that she's the right person for that job because she started that job in the small business. Now she's going to start that under Department of Education. It's a big piece. It's a big bite to chew off and say we're dismantling the Department of Education. So I do think they're going to start it by pieces, but I do think she's the right person for that job because I do think she has a history of shrinking an organization and having it seem viable. And that is something they're going to do. It's clear from the what's written in the mandate for leadership or the 2025 project that they're already saying, like, look, federal education has gone from $14 billion a year to $95 billion a year. That has to be brought down, and it's also clear. Well, I'll just say that, like that I agree that this is their goal. I think one thing that comes up, there's a few things that come up for me in doing it is like it's hard for me to read these things, and I don't want to, and kind of care, if you will. I look at this kind of thing and I go like, it seems like leftists and liberals for a long time have felt like they could use the state as a lever to control education, so they kind of played their games. And now I see the conservatives are doing the same. And again, I feel caught in this kind of left wing, right wing, two wings of the same bird. Like each of them is playing their game. And so for me, I don't want the state in any of this stuff. But at the same time, I don't see I see liberals for a long time felt like we could use the state to adjudicate or make a society or education more socially just, and they didn't do that. It didn't do that. It polarized things and again empowered the state to do things so that they eventually were able to just shut down the schools altogether when they wanted to, when the lockdowns occurred. But now I see that the idea of parent rights and freedom are going to be used to essentially create a free-for-all, a kind of a federally politically dismantled system, but a system that itself is primarily state-funded anyway. Like of the billions of dollars that go into education per year, 95 billion come from the state, but about another 800 billion come from the federal state, but about 800 billion total comes from states across the country. So I kind of don't exactly know what kind of game they're up to here, but I do know it does seem like something where they're trying to create a situation that removes the centrifugal forces that state uses to keep a system together and allow it to be disassembled and separated. It feels like something that will benefit ed tech, feels like it will benefit private interests in here, and under the ruse of parental rights and trying to give communities back a voice in their schools. So it's a little bit confusing to me how they think taking away 95, let's say they took all 95 billion, because yes, in the first 10 years, like some of the funds they say are ones that no longer will the federal government be saying what those things were. The federal government will just be dispensing these different pots of money to the states themselves. But they certainly in Title IX or Title I, I think it was, they certainly said in 10 years, they want that federal money coming down to zero. So there's no Title I money coming out anymore. So I do believe the goal is to draw it down so that, if you will, I think they want to go from 95 billion to zero, but that's only 10% of all the money that's in education nationally. So I wonder what their game is, and what do they think that actually accomplishes? And that to me is a question.
Well, a couple things is, so yeah, on Project 2025, right? It says that, so they're going on 2021 budget or reporting, and they're saying that the total federal spending was 95.5 billion. The Department of Education Reorganization Act, according to the same document, Project 2025, going to save 17 billion. You got 78.5 left. Like, that's not a huge dent, right? So and you're right, I did read that, right, we'll phase them out over time. But let's say they do actually intend to sunset all or the bulk of the funding mechanisms through those entitlements, right? And so you're kind of suggesting, like, well, then where does the funding come from, or how does that benefit the state or the corporatocracy? This is where the school choice thing comes in. Like, so those two things, here's another reason why I think they're going to get rid of the department, is because getting rid of the department and moving everything to these other agencies, et cetera, is basically part and parcel. It goes hand in glove with the school choice program agenda that they have laid out or sort of in the works. So after they pass the Department of Education reorganization, or whether they do, they also want to pass a bill called ECCA, which I think is intentionally a cute little spin on ESSA. Okay. It's the conservative version of ESSA. It's the Educational Choice for Children Act. And I got the whole thing kind of laid out here. Like I said, we can talk more about the whole thing overall, but one of the particular provisions is that they'll funnel those school choice dollars through what are called SGOs, scholarship granting organizations. Scholarship granting organization is basically a nonprofit corporation that is going to take in donations from whoever. Could be, you, me and you could send them 10, 20 bucks if we wanted to. But if moms and dads and working people could pool their money together to create scholarship opportunities for kids who wouldn't need a scholarship granting organization. So if a scholarship granting organization can tip the scales with that amount of money, and they're not coming up with the capital themselves, and it's not the government, because the government's subsidizing that with their tax credits, et cetera, where's the money come from? Big companies, most likely big ed tech companies, most likely companies that comply with ESG stuff, right? And so, they say, this is the pitch that Corey DeAngelis, he always says, what is it? Money for students, not for buildings. Money for students, not for buildings. Well, and this sounds like it's better, but it's actually 1,000 times worse, because if the money's attached to the building and you don't like it, and you find some way, you grab your kid, you pull them out, and you can put them somewhere where those strings aren't attached, where that money and all the federal regulations aren't attached. If you attach the funding to the student, it doesn't matter where he or she goes. The mandates, the regulations, whatever it might be, that's going to follow the student. So, and that money, it's not just like, we alphabetize a list and, you're next on the list. It's going to be largely going to be, these different SGOs, different nonprofits are going to, they might have ones that are for, people of color, or ones that are for women, or, but it might also be for, conservative, Christian, classical, it could be anything you can think of. But the money is going to be attached to that student, and it's going to follow them on sort of their school choice ledger, their blockchain ledger.
Right.
So in other words, we're just going to put bookends on it and say that, so you get rid of the federal department, you push it into these different agencies, and that's most of the entitlement money. But then the rest of it's going to basically go through basically an ESG company, and wherever that kid goes, it's going to track them. And go ahead.
Well, just to say that like the game you're talking about, and they play this in the 2025 document, is they put out cheese, but there's a lot of things hidden within it. When they talk about who they're helping, they often were mentioning faith-based organizations and things like that. They mention having families be able to, parent rights and faith-based organizations being able to give students the kind of schools they want. But like you're right, when they talk, the real funder here are the SGOs, and the SGOs are the same people who are the funders for EdTech. I haven't talked about this, but my school was positing the idea that I was going to have to teach a scripted curriculum, and I was able to push back and say not. But those scripted curriculums are all EdTech products, and they were all part of the automation process of my job. When you look who's funding all these curriculums, it's Bill and Melinda Gates, it's the Hewlett Packard Foundation, it's Carnegie Mellon, it's it's big oil, big industry, big tech for sure. And so if you want to know who's actually going to be the funder now, it's going to be them, because they're producing the curriculum, and now they're funding they're going to direct the money to the students so they can find their pathway. And when you don't have a pathway that's not connected to a building, then the only pathway they're going to have is connected to their computer from their house, and it's one-on-one. So you don't need a blockchain. I mean, they're going to be going. All that will be done. It's very interesting how much is being put over to HHS, where I do think there is a healthcare blockchain process going underway. And in many ways, they're kind of breaking apart another way of getting students onto the grid. But it looks like they're going to find it. In some ways, school choice might be the way to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really do think that those things are going to dovetail very neatly together. That your blockchain, your electronic health records on your blockchain system is just going to be that part of the health part of the ledger. Your school choice voucher money with your badges that say which competencies you got based on what programs you did, that's going to be on the other part of your ledger. That's going to be your total digital, your comprehensive biopsychosocial digital ID. Yeah. Okay. And the thing, and when they pitch this to like, oh, it's going to help students with, imagine you wanted to go to a different school. Well, let's put it this way. Let's say, I don't like the school where my, son or daughter's at, and I want to move them somewhere else. If I don't have enough money to transport my child outside of the district, and they give me this little stipend or whatever it is, it's not enough to put it down. Like, you're not taking them to a private school. You might move them to another public school down the street, which is any different than the one that you have, or you might move them to a charter school that's maybe, not too far down the street. But that's, again, going to have the federal strings attached. Okay. And if you were able to, and you probably won't even be able to do that, because a lot of families that are, let's say stuck in a school that's not the greatest, it's probably not in a community that has a lot of money to begin with, probably doesn't have the best public transportation system. So what I'm getting at is, where is that money going to go? It's going to go into a computer. The only other thing that you're going to be able to do with it, it's going to go into the computer. It's either going to go into a virtual charter school, or there's provisions where you can get it for tutoring, which is probably going to be online. Okay, maybe not. Tutoring, or they said various technologies, assistive technologies, or mental health services, to help the student with, testing anxiety, ADHD, what you name, the pathology that they've attached to low performance in education. And that's where the two ledgers come together on the single digital ID.
Can I add something to that I found? The document itself, and I just want to highlight this.
Just one more thing is that money is also, by the way, goes to the rich people, so they also get to subsidize their private education. Everybody gets it, so that's just going to widen the gap in the meantime. I just wanted to add that last part to it. Go ahead.
Right, and ultimately, it's sort of like in the same way that's like the defense industry, where the money goes into the defense industry, but then it comes back and goes to what are these various McDonnell Douglas and like, it's all money, and that's what's going to happen here. All this money is ultimately going to end up back into the hands of the ed tech industries that are providing their virtual schools. And so it's a subsidy for those industries.
Yeah. And Peter Thiel, as I've documented in my book and many articles. Oh, go ahead. But he's invested in, I think, Clever or Newton or both, which are adaptive learning courseware. So the people behind the Trump administration and the tech oligarchs behind him, they're all on board with this. They're invested in this agenda as well.
Okay. Yeah. So you had mentioned competency-based education.
Oh, yeah, that's yes.
And here was the thing that the quote I highlighted from the 2025 document. Competency-based education is a promising approach that could provide a high quality and affordable education to many students. Since the credit hour, which measures the time in the classroom, is inappropriate for such programs, the direct assessment method was introduced to allow competency-based programs to participate in the federal financial aid program. And this is where Allison talked about earning badges and taking tests so you could build up your badges and things like that. And you could be on, again, from cradle to grave education process where you're always getting retrained and that kind of stuff. So this is in line with that. However, overregulation has hampered the usage of direct assessment, with the leading competency-based universities choosing to instead convert their courses into credit hours for compliance purposes. One of the leading obstacles is the requirement that courses include regular and substantive interaction between faculty and students. New regulations, and this is one of their things they recommend, new regulations should clarify the definition and requirements of regular and substantive interaction for competency-based education, as well as for online programs. So clearly, they think that the idea of people spending time with a teacher, come on, you don't really need to do that for education.
Dude, and that's always been the goal of CBE for the longest time. Charlotte talked about this before we even had, before computers were common in the household, even just for playing video games. Like, you talked about this. The CBE and comes out of OBE. They mentioned in their direct assessment. Dude, I have, not in this room, but in the other room, I have stacks and stacks of files where you can see that all of those are there are some sort of semantic or there are some nuances in terms, but more or less they all refer to the same thing, and it all is based on operant conditioning. It's all based on the Skinner method. And so she remembers seeing early on where they were trying to get rid of the Carnegie units, is what they call you. So credit hours, that's what they call Carnegie units. For whatever problems there might be with that system, how do you get rid of that? Oh, it's online and it's at your own pace and it's personalized. And this gets back into, so this is another place where I think that the school choice, the personalized rhetoric around the school choice, you're going to hear that around. I don't mean to digress, but that's what the Maha stuff is going to be. I think it's going to be a lot of, because you hear Bobby talk about it's got to be, he wants it to be effective and safe, and he just needs more data. Well, where do you get data from? I think it's going to be something like a program that I wrote about a long time ago. It was called All of Us. Might still be in function. There's a guy, one of the people that was involved in it, it was linked with the Precision Medicine Initiative. One of the guys involved was a guy named Eric Dishman, and he was involved in developing like smart homes and wearables for Alzheimer's patients and things like that. But they wanted like however many million people to enroll in this All of Us study, where they were going to study they were basically going to study your bio data, your biorhythms, through Fitbits, wearables, etc. They're also going to study your genes, and based on, so it's sort of a Lamarckian scheme in the idea, right? Epigenetic, meaning like they wanted to see the correlations between your genes and your behaviors and your environment, and then also your responses to particular treatments based on those data points, those algorithms, the genetic and the environmental, right? And so same idea. That's what the precision medicine is known as, personalized medicine. Just like competency-based education is going to be personalized education. And part of that is going to be looking at your health records to say like, oh, Jimmy's got ADHD, so he needs this type of module on his, he needs more gamified learning, than lecture, whatever it is. Right. And so that's just another reason, another area why I think the school choice and the Maha are just part of making everything on some sort of a digital blockchain ledger that can be directly funded, facilitated, nudged by the oligarchs, not just the tech companies, but the banks and whoever is going to be funding your SGO or your health token or whatever.
And Eduardo, I'm sorry, can I add one more thing to what he's saying? And one thing to indicate that they're going to try to go do this personalization is that the 2025 basically talks about, we no longer want to restrict people of color, Black people, Latino from being put into special education programs. Obama said they were under Obama. They said those folks were overrepresented there, and it had they even in the document say it had the unintended effect of meaning that resources that could be going to students who need special education help didn't go to them. So they're saying they want to open those gates up again, kind of saying, well, we want to help students of color, but really what they want to do is basically again create the raison d'etre for your own personalized. You've been identified with this learning disability in the same way that Allison had talked about how there was going to be a whole wave of dyslexia dyslexia testing going on in California to try to get different people to be like, this is your problem, this is your problem, this is your problem, to create the basis for the fact that no, you cannot be educated under one roof. Everyone's going to have your own personalized, here's your education plan based on the tests that show this is what you have and this is what you need. Here's where you can go get it. We'll give you some credits so that you can have some money to go that direction. But the process of personalization is really literally just to attach everyone to the internet teat of Silicon Valley ed tech.
Yeah. And look, I'll tell you another reason why I can see it's on its way down the pipe is that leading up to this presidential election, if you looked at sort of just the Republican platform writ large, school choice is a big one on their agenda, and there's a couple. Let me see. So certainly Greg Abbott, I think Governor Bill Lee as well, and probably some others, Republican governors who during the election were vetting and either ousting or endorsing candidates based on whether or not they're going to go along with school choice. So if there were people that were already incumbents, like they tried to push them out. Like, in other words, that indicates that this is very important. Once they get in, that they want to make it a federal thing. So that's just more sort of, that's more my weather vane, kind of getting a sense of the winds, I guess.
I mean, I don't know if we're switching gears, but I was just observing how I was looking at Project 2025's how do you say it? Not promotion, or the encouragement of families to be to exercise the right of religious freedom and not to be censored, and to be and parents not to have that, not to feel like they cannot share that. I don't know how exactly they put it, if I can go back to, but then I look at another part where they don't say it explicitly, but it's about what material can be used in schools. And I feel that's contradictory. It's like you don't want to censor religious expression,
right,
but then you are censoring or directing or trying to manage the way that teachers teach curriculum. And therefore, it's all under this, it's really book bans and more of censorship that's going to be used in education. So I don't know if any of you want to speak to that. And I found that conflicting, right?
Yeah, I'll just say something to add to that. Like, I mean, it's kind of marbled throughout the 2025 document, but I found certain places where they were like, no public education employee or contractor shall use you use a name to address a student other than the name listed on a student's birth certificate.
I saw that as well.
Permission of a student's parent or guardian. No public education employer or contractor shall use a pronoun in addressing a student that is different from the student's biological sex without the written permission of a student's parents or guardian. No public institution may require an education employee or contractor to use a pronoun that does not match a person's biological sex if contrary to the employee's or contractor's religious or moral conviction. I mean, we know who they're appealing to. We know what they're attempting to appeal to. And obviously, I believe there's liberal control freakery that went on in education that now has boomeranged back so that people are like trying to push back on that. But in both cases, the state is winning, right? The state has found a way of garnering freedom people and people who want to fight racism and social justice and for LGBTQ rights and get them both to support a state that is screwing them both. And now we have the more conservative side essentially empowering the state to come in and say, here's what you're going to do. We're going to tell you how we're going to do it in the name of parents' rights and things like that. But no, once again, the state authorities are coming in and directing things.
Well, a couple of things I would note about that is you're right, Eduardo, that there's a clear contradiction in there, and it kind of cuts both ways. So one is that a lot of they're pitching that where a lot of this money, this school choice money, is going to go to faith-based organization, church schools, etc. And they're also homeschools. Okay, well, those federal strings come attached. Look, and I'll just use one of the state bills. So this was a state bill. It was Alabama. It was a Choose Act. It's this one was a school choice bill that largely wanted to put in ESAs rather than vouchers. Okay. Some of the language in here, though, if you look at so statute, let's see, 4.1, 4.6, 4.6b. So 4.1 must submit to the department any information required by the department for implementation of the program. 4.6, agree to comply with rules adopted by the department for the administration of the program. 4.6.b, failure to comply shall constitute grounds for the department in its discretion to revoke, recover, suspend, or deny the ESA credit otherwise made available pursuant to this act. I mean, this is just a state level bill. I guarantee you that the federal bill is going to have similar provisions in there that are written sort of open-ended, where it's like, if and when we say something and you don't do it, you don't get your money and you might have to pay it back. Okay, so that'll cut one way for the people, the homeschoolers that think they're going to be able to do a classical curriculum or a Christian curriculum or something like that, or a church that thinks they're going to be able to maintain their sort of their belief system in terms of their pedagogy. But the way it cuts in the other direction is that I think some of the language in there too almost is kind of like there will be no anti-American sentiments, like that the curriculum must be pro-American. Well, what does that mean? You mean pro-Trump? Or Charlotte used to tell the story when she got when she was hired for the department, and it was the assistant secretary of education, Donald Sinise. He was the main dude above her. Sinise said to her, are you going to be loyal? And she said, well, I thought he meant to the Constitution. So I said, yes, but apparently he meant Ronald Reagan. And he found out that, that's not how that turned out. I mean, that's an anecdote, story I just wanted to throw out there, because same kind of idea. Like, what does that mean? So when you start saying that, that means anti-American. Well, that's woke stuff. Okay, maybe you could say that. Maybe you could say, right, you could pick out particular principles that some of the, intersectional stuff, or the standpoint theory, or, where just everything about America is homophobic, racist, white supremacist, go down the list. And therefore you're equating all these pejorative things with America, and therefore that's okay, maybe you could do that. Right. But unless you stipulate those particular things, if you just have this umbrella term, dude, anything can be that. It could be, guess what? It could be you having a very traditional belief in Christianity, what you think might be conservative and it should be protected by a Republican administration that claims to believe in God and all this stuff might not be the case. That might be considered anti-American as well, that you believe in God more than Trump or whatever, So yes, those things are in there.
They're explicit in the document here. I mean, I want to show this again. Like this was in the reforming areas of study funding. These were things like that are direct recommendations that we can act on right now. Congress should wind down so-called area studies programs at universities, which, although intended to serve American interests, sometimes fund programs that run counter to those interests. In the meantime, the next administration should promulgate a new regulation to require the Secretary of Education to allocate at least 40% of funding of international business programs that teach about free markets and economics, and require institutions, faculty, and fellowship recipients to certify that they intend to further the stated statutory goals of serving American interests. It's like, I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to raise your hand and make a promise to the state or to the U.S. empire or something, and then you can get your money.
And I did want to note that, by the way, so they mentioned they want to change the regulations for competency-based education. They already did a lot of that during lockdowns, and I wrote about it. They changed regulations. Remember where it said they need substantive time between faculty and student? They changed it then. This was April, probably 2020, because they pushed everybody online, and technically we were breaking rules because you weren't interacting with a human being most of the time. So they had to, and they changed it, and there's like 200, 100 plus, or maybe even 200 something references to competency-based education, direct instruction, outcomes-based education. They even refer to adaptive learning and artificial intelligence, and saying that those interaction with those types of algorithms, software, or digital intelligences could be counted as that substantive interaction with faculty. So I don't know what they want to add to it as far as that, but they pretty much already they've made a big step in that direction. What else are they going to do? Maybe they're going to add some specific provisions for GPT, generative AI, maybe, because it wasn't popular yet. I mean, couldn't do half of what it does at the time. So maybe that's it. Maybe they'll have more particulars.
I noticed that now that I've got clear, they want to eradicate the Department of Education. I noticed that obviously that there is a push for a choice for like this, a decision to move out of public education, and people to have vouchers to go to private school or to have homeschooling. And so I was looking further into Burke's, the author of this, and her background, and she thinks that there's obviously that there is let me here state it. They say that education policies discourage Americans from starting families in favor of attending university, and also suppress religious beliefs that encourage high fertility rates. So I don't know if there's something or an agenda behind what's being written and co-authored, or not, in Project 2025 about just the fact that we should have a promotion of religious education for high fertility rates in America.
Yeah.
If it's not relevant, and if it's out of what we're doing here, that's fine. I've just noticed her background. She wrote this, and I can clearly see why she wants to dismantle the Department of Education, and as well as why we shouldn't have public education in the first place. And she's in favor of more women having babies and having schooling or going to education. And which is interestingly enough, she has a PhD herself.
So is she says that in Project 2025 or in something?
No, I was looking further into her background.
Oh, that's okay. That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So I wondered, I was doing sort of an Alison McDowell sort of approach, looking and seeing the connection of what institution she represents, and what other articles she's written. Because if she's written this, I wonder what other sort of beliefs she holds outside of Project 2025 that she just wrote, but as a person, what she stands for, who she's hired by, and all these other things. So I was just curious in that point. But again, if it's not relevant, you don't have to go into that direction.
So that's popular rhetoric on the chunk of Trump's base that you have, like people like Elon Musk, like, oh, we need to make more babies. And, so we are as a country, our birth rate is not replacement level, right? It's less than, I think it's 1 point whatever. And you need at least 2 per family, right? Because you got to replace mom and dad. But like, does the education system like encourage that? I mean, well, I 100% insofar as we promote the sustainable development goals. This stems from, okay, if you go back to, there were several world population conferences. There's 3 of them, UN World Population Conferences. Then there's a couple international population conferences. It's either the first or the second international ICDP, International Conference on Population and Development. And it was in the early 90s. They called it the Cairo Conference. And so when the UN was first set up, it was pretty much a creation of Western, Anglo-American, European nations, right? Like what we call the quote unquote third world. Those countries didn't have seats at the table. All right. And so during those first 3 world population conferences, there's like explicit provisions for like, basically what they refer to as Malthusian policies, right? Could have been sterilization. Well, come towards the Cairo conference and countries like, that were not at the table who were the subject of a lot of that, right? So they're thinking, the Westerners, the Anglo-Americans are thinking that, well, most of the overpopulations from, right, all the poor brown people and all these other parts of the world, like those are the places that we need to, right, bring the population down. Well, once they had a seat at the table, they're like, we don't like these what they come to call top-down policies, population policies. So they didn't outright ban the Malthusian policies, but what they do instead is they go, okay, no more top-down stuff. We're going to make this about what they started to frame it as women's rights, access to healthcare, education, and the workforce. So instead of like snatching up people like they were doing in India and forcibly sterilizing people, right? They figured that, well, if you encourage women to go into the workforce, you'll have to encourage them to go into higher ed. So they'll have to postpone making a baby. And if you give them access to healthcare, right, meaning contraception, and if they need an abortion, right, if you give them the access to these things and you encourage them to go, have a career, all I think, they will voluntarily remove themselves from the reproductive sweepstakes, or they will at least they'll hold off long enough to make a significant dent in population growth. And is insofar as schools promote the SDGs and all that. I mean, it's in there. So, it's not wrong to say that, that does encourage that. And that does often, especially in developed countries where you can have, where you don't need a family necessarily to take care of you, right? If you got enough money, and you're rich enough, and it's, you got all these amenities, that does tend to be the case. Now, all that said, do I really think that Burke or anybody on that platform actually wants more babies? I don't think that's the case. I think they're trying to patronize that part of the base. That's what I would guess.
That's what I guess I was trying to get at, and I was informing correctly because I was distracted from the background noise in my house. I guess what I wasn't saying was there are like replacement theories in that are connected to some of the folk that are in the Trump administration and who definitely don't want immigration, and they're using immigration now, part of the campaign and part of Trump's team, to be able to appeal to a certain base, because I think that that's what's hot right now, right? And as well as I also think that there isn't necessarily a belief in replacement. I don't think that the Trump administration doesn't really believe that there's a replacement theory. I think they just want to massively put everyone on blockchain and massively put everyone on a database. That's what I believe what's happening. But anyhow, so appealing to a certain base is also what I think that there's underlying tones in Project 2025 about dismantling the Department of Education, and also promoting more religious education because we have a fertility issue here in the USA. So I just think that all that's connected. But that's what I was trying to figure out and find the connection in looking further into Lindsay Burks' background. But anyhow, it may or may not be relevant. And that's all I wanted to share about that. And we don't have to go into it further.
Well, I mean, I will say that, I mean, that, yeah, that did cross my mind that, as I was kind of articulating the whole SDG theory about population, replacement rates and stuff. That, yes, I mean, so I guess the people that would respond to that would be probably, I would guess, white people. Let's just say it. That's the demographic that really, uses the we're being invaded and this type of rhetoric. And so, and to your point, I think all of that fits in with the whole digital ID thing. I think that's going to be that's probably might be one of the first places where they really put in some kind of a biometric or some sort of digital ID tracking system. They'll probably start with this, as part of their deportation process. Well, we got to track them first. We got to tag them and know where you are. So, and that'll just be another part of your ledger with your school choice data and your health data. So,
the thing I would say, because I think your point is important, Eduardo, because when you talk about who this woman wrote this part of the document, but it was vetted, it's been edited. There are people who looked at this thing to make sure that it fit their interests. Her group. So when she puts forward the idea that we're protecting parents' rights, or we're protecting the right of religious organizations to have free speech and to practice their religion freely, hidden underneath the fact that not just she's part of EdChoice is the fact that EdChoice was formerly named Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, and the Friedman is Milton Friedman. So really, the God that she is praising is not Christian God or Muslim God. It's the free market God. It's the capitalist God. And when we talk about, and in all the industrialized countries around the globe, not just the United States, you're seeing a lower birth rate. And that problem, I partially believe it is related to, in this country, I do believe there's been health things that are screwing people up, that are making it harder for them to have kids. And I do think the vax schedule is part of that. But the big thing is the fact that people's futures are much more uncertain financially. And that's happening in Japan, that's happening in Britain, that's happening in the United States. And I don't think the school situation, and that's happening in China. I believe that's happening in Russia. And I don't know, I can't say for a fact I know it's happening in Russia, but I know it's happening in China, Japan, United States, and Britain. And the reason that's happening is because capitalism has made the situation for most working people much, 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 much worse, much, much, much more precarious. And so the idea of being able to go forward into the future and raise a child when more of that is born by you, and that's what's coming more in Europe, and that's what's actually happening more even in Japan and even China. People are choosing not to have children. The fact that schools may teach them how to put on a condom, or even actually tell them about Planned Parenthood if you do happen, they will promote that sort of thing. Yes, there's a what's that called? Not
eugenicist.
Eugenicist. Yes, yes. There's a eugenics. There's a eugenics element behind those people. Like in fact, there's an origin behind that. But I think what's at play here is just the market. And once again, these are people who promote free markets, and many of the people they're talking to believe that if you let the free market rip, that things would be better because crony capitalism has made things bad. But that's what I believe is the hidden ideology that's really behind this is not a religious one or one that's against critical race theory or for parents' rights. It's a pro-market ideology, which is going to basically make all children and all workers subject to private interests.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just thank you for indulging me with that. I just was curious from your both point of view. But we could carry on.
No, I mean, we could talk about Burke a little bit more if you want, because I got
I think we should try to stick. I'm always about let's stick to what the topic is. But you could finish your thoughts. Why don't you, John?
Well, it's relevant because she's connected to, like, okay, here's another thing. School choice, old hat, people, old hat. The yes, Milton Friedman and the Ed Choice. It used to be what Milton Rose Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. They're one of the early proponents of the voucher system. But it goes back to the 70s, dude. I have articles that Charlotte's friend Mary Thompson wrote. They're on my database. Where they were trying the voucher system in, oh, I want to say, so I think she wrote for the San Jose Mercury, so I'm pretty sure there was California ones, and there was, I believe, if I remember correctly, there was one in Arizona, um, early on. Okay, so let's just say this. Okay, first of all, school choice means charter schools and the basket of other funding mechanisms, which include vouchers, education savings accounts, tax credits for tuition. The charter school system's already in place. All right. Bill Clinton, you can, by the way, it's a conservative thing, right? That's why Bill Clinton was the guy that made the first federal charter school bill. That's why Al Shanker, who was the president of the AFT, was the guy that came up with the idea, right? These people are both left wingers, both Democrats, one of them a union guy. Okay. And Randy Weingarten was also, she ran a charter school at one point. Okay. So the charter, so that's it. Like I said, pretty much every state has, probably in every county or every township almost, right? So the next part that they want to get in is the voucher system. Because the voucher system now is where you can, like, to use DeAngelis's language, now you can attach the money and the regulation straight to the kid. You can attach it to a church. You can attach it to a school. Your house by proxy. All right, and the ESAs and the TCTs are the same thing. The only differences are is you're getting the money up front, or you're going to pay for it, then you get it back at the end of the year. That's more or less how it works. Okay, all of this stuff. If we look at Burke, okay, look, so that Project 2025 is a heritage thing, right? Okay, it's Heritage Foundation. Okay, well, Lindsay M. Burke is director of Heritage Center for Policy of Education. All right. The person that was the director of the Heritage Center for Education Policy, at one point prior, I don't know, there might have been some people in between, but maybe not. They might have just switched places, was a woman named Jean Allen. All right. She was a senior policy advisor for the Department of Education. And she just happens to be, I don't know if she awards it or if she earned it, but there's something called the Yass Prize for it's called the Yass, YASS Prize for Sustainable, Transformational, Outstanding, and Permissionless Education. I mean, first of all, okay, sustainable, pretty sure that's not a word that all these Trumpers want to hear, right? It doesn't sound very conservative, very right wing, very based to me, right? It sounds kind of lefty to me, right? Permissionless education, that just doesn't sound right. Like, there's somebody's got to get permission, right? The parents, hopefully, at least. And so the acronym it's called Stop Education. Now the reason I point her out, dude, is I'm sitting and looking at, was it C-SPAN? What was I? So Jean Allen also runs. Okay, right. So she runs the Center for Education Reform, CER. And CER on November 7th was sponsored one of these STOP initiatives. Okay, and they gave out a prize. And who else is there? Happens to be, well, Gene is there. But Kevin Chavis was I don't remember his exact title. K-12 Inc. Okay. I don't know if he's the board of directors or vice president. He might have been a few different things. Okay. K-12 Inc. is the first ever virtual charter school. It was the biggest, probably still is the biggest. He also is a guy that worked with Jeb Bush. to set up the Digital Learning Council to standardize competency-based standards for something that became what was known as the Virtual Public Schools Act. The Virtual Public Schools Act basically took their principles that him and Bush and another governor, and I think it was Bob Wise, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It's in chapter 3 or 4 of this book. It's also in an article on my website. And that was sponsored. That bill was drafted by ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, which sponsored several of Betsy DeVos's events. And Betsy DeVos also ends up collaborating with Kevin Chavis through the AFC, American Federation for Teachers, for Children. I'm sorry, American Federation for Children. It's a school choice foundation. They fund charter schools, etc. And the big spokesman for that today is Corey DeAngelis. Kevin Chavis was also on one of Obama's transition teams or one of his campaigns. All right. So this is a guy that's been working both sides of the aisle. He's involved in the virtual charter schooling industry, and he's connected to this Yass Prize Institute that's sponsored by the woman that used to run the position that Lindsey Burke runs now. All right. You already noted that Burke was part of the Ed Choice, which is Milton Friedman's organization. This is where the voucher stuff comes from. But she also, so I have notes here that are old, but I don't know if she went to school at George Mason University or if she had an administrative position there, but here, I got the notes here. PhD from George Mason University. Also looks like sits on or was part of the Board of Visitors, which oversees finance, land use, and academic programs. Now, the reason why George Mason University is important is because George Mason University is basically a Koch brothers, heavily funded by Koch brothers. Okay. But there's also another connection between Heritage, George Mason through a CIA front company known as the John M. Olin Foundation. John M. Olin Foundation, they either fund or sponsor the Institute of Employment Practice and Policy and a distinguished professorship of economics at George Mason University. All right. And John M. Olin Foundation also has a program where it sponsors or funds fellows at the Hudson Institute. Hudson Institute is one of these futurist organizations. I don't know if we got to it when we did the scenario planning episode, but it's relevant to that. Okay. So if people want to go back, they can watch that. Who are some of the John M. Olin fellows at the Hudson Institute? Bill Bennett, the guy that set up K-12 Inc., who was Secretary of Education after T.H. Bell. He took over Project Best and Project Slate, which was the successor to that. That's the whole thing that Charlotte blew the whistle on. Another fellow at the Hudson, the John M. Olin fellow at Hudson Institute is Chester Finn. Chester Finn, I think, was Assistant Secretary of Ed under Bennett. Yeah, and the rest of the rest of these notes here relates to people can go back and look at the scenario planning stuff, but it's just to show you that, okay, the woman that is writing this part of the Project 2025, which is right, it's all about getting rid of the federal education, bringing in the SGOs, basically the corporate tech funding arm of for the voucher system, etc. She comes out of a long history of not just poke money and your quote unquote free market capitalists, right, that have been funding the school choice industry for so long, but also, right, with weird overlaps and connections with the Department of Education itself, but also like people like Chavis who have played both sides of the field, Democrat and Republican. So I mean, so the personnel, and there's other authors on there. She's the chief author. Right. There's a few other people like that are listed. If you go through their background, these people are connected to Heritage, et cetera, as well. So it's just another indication that this is a plan they've had for a long time, and they think they're going to get some more traction under Trump and this administration than they did under the last two Republican administrations.
And one thing I want to say, they specify a number of institutions, a number of stakeholders in education that are good ones. Like they mentioned, like religious ones. They mentioned banks. They obviously mention, people who give to charities, which they don't really say who they are, but I think that I know them as much of these big funding foundations, like I mentioned, the Bill and Melinda Gates area. But one institution that they say should not be in education, they kind of hold one, is NEA, is the national is the teachers union. And it's very interesting. Like at one point in time, first of all, I think this whole document is an attack on workers and things like that. But I also don't see NEA as really being part. Now, it's interesting for them to take them out of the project, but I don't see them as part of any defending things. And I think when I think about the position that NEA and AFT took during the lockdowns, it helped create the wedge that this document is going to try to take advantage of between parents and between teachers union, and I believe has laid the groundwork for a very good environment for saying, yeah, keep the teachers union out of this whole thing, get teachers unions out of education. Now, obviously, that's going to help financially for any contracts that have and things like that. But I have to say that I think teachers unions have done a lot of good work, or I'm being facetious here, to help promote the fact that parents could very well support this kind of document when it says keep the teachers unions out, because I believe we abandoned parents during a time when I wonder what would have happened had actually trade unions taken a position of don't close the schools, we don't want to like hurt families and things like that. If they would have been able to take advantage of that as much as they're going to try to take advantage of that here with this document, which basically says all stakeholders can be in here other than the teachers union, which, of course, that is going to be another way to reduce costs. But I think the unions themselves have done a lot of damage to make it possible for this to happen.
If my memory serves me correctly, because it's been several months since I read the document, I think what they were saying about the NEA wasn't to like disband it or dissolve it. I think it was that they have some kind of a special status where they're a special consultative status,
Yeah.
or their charter.
They're just saying not to be right. They're not dismantling it. They're saying they should no longer be allowed to play a role in the future of education in terms of making a statement within it. Where they were laying that they were saying that they're places like banks and charities and churches should have a stake place in the decision making.
Yeah, I think it had to do with like when they're actually drafting regulations, or like that they have some kind of some sort of important say in the process, and they wanted to get rid of that. Right. Yeah, but I think that right. But I think that they're gonna keep them around. I think they're gonna keep them. The reason why I think that is because of my series on Education International. I mean, you know what I mean? Like you're not just going to remove one local union from, I don't remember how many it is, dude, but it's a lot, dude. It's a lot of countries, a lot of unions. And they're all tied in with the WEF and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I mean, after doing that series, I saw coming away like with a bird's eye view, what I gathered from it was that the unions were more or less functioning in conjunction with the International Labor Organization, some of the other like global union coalitions and things like that. I don't remember all the acronyms. You can go and check out the article series on Unlimited Hangout. Was that they were functioning as essentially like they're basically labor managers. Like they're organizations that are there to galvanize, centralize, get all of the teachers and paraprofessional, tutors, whatever, everybody that falls under the umbrella of someone that works at a school to go along with with a global agenda, et cetera. So pretty sure they still like our government, our corporate, whatever form of ruler we have in the next 4 years, like that's still going to be useful to them in terms of, part of not just building their national economy, but their place in the global economy. And so I think they'll keep them around. It just be that somehow they might minimize what they have to say in a negotiation process. But in the same way that getting rid of the Department of Education and moving it somewhere else isn't really substantively different for us, meaning it's different for them because, like you said, now it's more efficient for them to fund things and to funnel the money back into big businesses' pockets or whatever. But yeah, and so I think the reason why they even put that out there is, again, that's a selling point for the base, right? Because everything is. You remember when you did the Newsmax interview? And you called me and you asked me, like, what should I expect? And remember one of the first things I said was they were going to give you a chance to say your piece, and at some point they're most likely going to steer it into, they're going to want you to bash the unions because that's all they did, and they did, and that's what they do. Their whole pitch for school choice is woke bad, gender stuff bad, critical theory bad, unions bad.
Right.
Well, what about? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, but here's what I would say is that I think keeping them out in this case means that any contractual restrictions that might need to be, that can be brought up, here's a place where they will not be brought up, and that they can work around those. So contracts can be more easily worked around, pay schedules can be more easily worked around.
Oh.
I mean, and that's the problem with this is I don't want workers to have less. I don't want workers to have less say. I do recognize that workers have to come together. But as you noted, these institutions that are these bureaucracies that sit atop workers trying to organize work more for our boss, work more for these institutions than they do for us. So it's a selling point for some of them to say they're operating against unions. I do believe that there's going to be a partial cost savings and a contractual workaround that will allow them to, that is going to be very helpful to what they need to do. It's just that it's that kind of duality we find ourselves in, where I'm not going to defend the NEA. I'm not. But at the same time, I recognize they're going to use that as part of dismantling workers' rights and making it so that workers are going to have to organize themselves again. They just need to fucking avoid these bureaucracies.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, man.
No, but just they're going to have to fight their unions as well as these other forces that we're talking about if they're going to make a positive change. And
but
I'm not very optimistic about that.
I think though that, but I think what they're trying to do, what they're trying to sway people towards is, just get rid of them altogether. We don't need unions at all. To me, like, that's the equivalent, to use an analogy, it'd be like, well, let's, Congress is all corrupt. Let's get rid of it. Let's just have a president.
Well, the capitalists, when they look at unions, they talk about how they're going to deal with the bureaucracy, and workers, when they look at the unions, are also going to have to deal with that bureaucracy. And they have different interests in challenging that bureaucracy. But I will say that bureaucracy does, as you would say, I think that bureaucracy does more to help their side than ours.
Did you want to switch gears, Andy?
No, I think I just wanted to make that point about our unions, that I feel like they've done, the bureaucracies have done a lot, and the teachers, the role they've played during the lockdown, have done a lot to lay the groundwork so that teachers' interests and teachers' unions' interests can be pushed aside by parents without much of a like, it won't be that hard for parents to be like, yeah, forget them. I think of the teacher strike in Chicago, in which there was unity there, and it was also true here in Oakland for a period of time. But in both cases, the unions ultimately settled for things that might have helped the union a bit, might have helped a school or two, but ultimately did not serve the parents and did not serve the people who were hoping for actually increased services and education and things like that. And basically, once the union got what it wanted, enough for itself, it kind of cut the that whole notion of we're doing this for parents and for students was kind of like cut loose then. And I think that has carried on during the COVID, during that whole COVID period. And we're paying the price of that. So it's going to be very easy for them to do this divide and conquer thing. Or rather, I think teachers and teachers unions has made it easier for Project 20 and 2025 to do divide and conquer.
Yeah. It's funny that a lot of, if you go back far enough, and you actually don't have to go that far back, like, I mean, other than, better pay and stuff like that, one of the most important things, teachers unions like were involved in unions for was like academic freedom.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, can you show me an example in the last 4 years where the unions, where there was any where they did anything other than parrot Pfizer commercials and CDC and that, you know what I mean? Like I don't know if the value of academic freedom had been, I don't know, maintained and cultivated, etc., you would think that you'd think there'd be a few more original thoughts in there. You know what I mean?
And also around the identity politics talking points of the Democratic Party that allowed them to divide people and make it so that people, like in this document, you hear people talking about like, hey, if a teacher doesn't want to, teach a certain thing, they shouldn't have to do that, right? And some of those things are being instituted by the left and by liberal causes, forcing teachers to teach certain things that they might not feel comfortable with. Do I agree with them? But do I politically agree with those teachers? It doesn't matter. I think academic freedom is academic freedom, so we should have a whole diversity of political views among teachers. I organize with people who I disagree with, and I shouldn't be able to tell them what to say or what to do. And that's the role. The union has actually supported the state in kind of helping say, no, you can teach that. No, you can't teach that. Instead of saying no, academic freedom across the board. But I will say that, I mean, if to summarize what I think the biggest thing, I believe, like one of the big things that's going to come out of the Trump period is a real boost in the arm to digital transformation on a lot, like all the policies that people were worried about in 2020 when the lockdowns hit and the so-called pandemic hit. Those things are really going to get a shot in the arm now under Trump, in healthcare, in education, in currency, as you mentioned, around the digital IDs, which I think are going to come in through the issue of immigration and surveillance, and monitoring immigrants, and also around voting, people having the right, making sure there's proper voting going on. So I think all those things that we thought we were fighting 4 years ago are now going to get a giant boost in the arm during this Trump regimen.
And it's going to be sold under the guise of doing the opposite.
Yeah.
It's going to be sold as he's fighting the deep state. Of course, he's dismantling everything. It's like, dude, he just dismantled the department. That's because that's the deep state and we're winning. That's how it's going to be. It's not going to be like, well, but don't you see how the principle that was violated in the previous scenario is still being violated in this scenario? You just changed the protagonists and the antagonist, basically. Like, that is one of the most frustrating things to me, is watching people but you know what? I guess, I mean, sadly, I guess there's a lot of people that really don't, principles doesn't really, it's not it's not a thought. It's not a thing. It's they might sound like it in the middle of it, but really what they're saying is, I don't like the way this affects me now. I want it. I don't care if it's the same type, same level of tyranny or injustice, as long as I'm not on the receiving end of it and have no moral scruples about the hypocrisy, or, some of it might be that people can't actually see. They get so caught up in the surface level of, Republican, Democrat, right, left, this group, that group, that they can't see how the principles are the same.
Yeah.
That, So I mean, I try to have sympathy and patience, but it's like at a certain point, and I just like I don't know I don't know how to communicate with you. I don't know what to say. Like
It's interesting because I feel like you're going to go through in 2024 what with your libertarian comrades, what I went through in 2020 with my socialist comrades.
Yeah.
Like, and I'll say, I remember saying exactly the same thing to you, how frustrated I was. And I was like, where are the principles? And you're like, oh, I don't know if they have any, and now I hear you saying the same thing. And it's like, it's so interesting how they're able to turn the wheel each time and find a new group to put underneath it.
Well, that's why I remember you said, like, well, are you like more like libertarian? And I always say, I'm Christian. Because I already knew that at the end of the day, like, I mean, I've seen, politics is very superficial. It's very shallow. I'm just saying, I mean, like, it's very crucial. It's very important. I mean, it can make a big difference in your quality of life, but it's all about it's about this. It's all about what do I get now? How do I get my piece of, I had a friend, he had a phrase, which was not a flattering phrase for him, but it was basically he'd say, I'll take my half out of the middle. So imagine you got a pie and you're gonna get 50%, and I'm gonna get 50%. I'm gonna take the 50% in the middle, you get all the crust. It's even. You got half, I got half. Like that's like most people, that's how they operate in politics. When you're talking about power and money, which is ultimately, it's very rare that you see people stand up for a principle that might make them have to work harder or suffer or and so I see I seen it coming. I've been telling you, like I said, I saw this coming almost a year ago, and I touched kind of like mentioned things and I could see like, oh, this is going to be horrific. Like, this is going to be one of the most like, like, at least I had a small bubble of, I already wrote this book and was like, okay, you might get fired. You might get blacklisted. You're going to basically, you're going to go against, every common sense and every, socially respectable idea. And it was like, oh, but, I ended up finding a little pocket of people who thought like, now it's like, now that pocket is,
Yep.
I don't even know if is it like a bubble in a piece of bubble wrap, maybe, like, it is what it is. That's what, I mean, it is what it is. It's not going to sway me either way,
Yep.
All right. I'm encouraged.
I'm very glad to have you here, Jake, and I'm glad to have you on board the isolated misery train.
The isolated misery train.
That's par for the course over here. Yeah. Wow. It's good to be back, brother.
Yeah. And I definitely appreciate that. You were not one who fell for it and stayed true to your principles, and I think that's really important. Even if I don't agree with every one of them, I just think the fact that you stuck to the things you believe and are consistent with that is what is meaningful.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That's it's worth all the flack.
All right. Well, thank you. And let's try to find a way to wrap up. Well, that does it for this week's episode. John Klyczek is the author of School World Order, The Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education by Trenday Books. And you can check out his work and other contributions to New Politics, the Center for Research on Globalization, Up-Ed News, the Intrepid Report, The Dissident Voice, and Unlimited Hangout. And you can always check him out here on What's Left. He'll always be a guest on What's Left. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics on our guests on the episode notes, where we found this episode, or on our blog and what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications or any of our platforms on the Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson and John. Thank you very much. Jake, we'll catch you all next time. Ciao.
Bye-bye.